"That child is not lost," the janitor said, almost to the floor, his voice low enough that it could have been mistaken for a thought that slipped out. The hallway did not react right away. The polished marble held its shine, the overhead lights hummed in their steady white tone, and a cluster of assistants near the reception desk kept speaking in quick, clipped sentences about a missing girl, their voices overlapping just enough to blur into urgency. Victoria Hale slowed without meaning to. Her heel hovered half an inch above the ground before settling again, softer this time. She did not turn fully, only shifted her gaze sideways. The man was a few yards down the corridor, one hand resting lightly on the handle of a mop bucket, the other adjusting the edge of a caution sign that had tilted a few degrees toward the wall. His uniform was clean but worn at the cuffs, the fabric creased in a way that suggested long hours rather than carelessness. He was not looking at the people searching. He was looking at the base of a vending machine, where a faint smudge of something colored the lower panel. "Sir, did you see a child come through here?" one of the security staff asked, stepping closer, breath still slightly uneven from moving too fast between floors. The janitor did not answer immediately. He shifted the caution sign another inch, aligning it with the grout line between tiles as if the angle mattered. Then he straightened, not fully, just enough to ease the bend in his back. "She is not lost," he repeated, this time directed at no one in particular. The guard blinked, glanced over his shoulder toward the others, then back at him. "We have a report," he said, voice tightening, as if clarity could be forced into the moment. 7-year-old, last seen near the elevators. The janitor's eyes lifted briefly, not meeting the guards, but passing over him, toward the bank of elevators where the indicator lights moved in slow, indifferent patterns. He gave a small nod, not agreement, more like acknowledgement of a fact already known, then reached down to twist the wringer on the mop. The rubber rollers turned with a soft, wet squeak. Water dripped back into the bucket. In a steady rhythm, Victoria watched the exchange without stepping closer. Something about the timing did not settle. The building had shifted into response mode the second the report came in. Radios crackled. Doors opened faster. People walked with purpose that bordered on collision. But the man had not changed his pace. Not sped up. Not paused in alarm. He moved the mop forward in a slow, even line, stopping just before the edge of a tile where a faint scuff mark interrupted the reflection of the ceiling lights. He leaned slightly to one side, studying it for a second longer than necessary, then angled the mop head to catch it at a different direction. He probably did not understand. Someone near the desk murmured, not unkindly, just dismissive, already turning back to their phone. Victoria did not respond. Her eyes stayed on the janitor. He pushed the bucket a few inches forward with his foot, the wheels clicking softly over the seam in the floor, then reached out and adjusted the position of a small chair near the vending machine, rotating it just enough so that it faced the hallway instead of the wall. It was a minor correction, barely noticeable, yet it lingered. The radios crackled again, louder this time, pulling attention back to the search. Victoria finally turned her head toward the elevators, then back once more. The janitor had already lowered his gaze again, the mop moving in the same measured path, as if nothing in the building had changed at all. The radios settled into shorter bursts, more controlled now, as if the building had adjusted to its own urgency. Victoria did not move back toward the elevators. Instead, she shifted her weight slightly, angling her body just enough to keep the janitor within her peripheral view while appearing to watch the security team coordinate near the front desk. He had not changed pace. The mop traced another line across the marble, stopping just shy of where the light from a ceiling panel fell unevenly, leaving a faint shadow that most people would step over without noticing. He adjusted his stance, one foot half a step behind the other, and leaned in to catch the edge of the shadow with a careful pass, as if the difference mattered. A pair of employees hurried past him, their shoes tapping faster than usual, one of them brushing the caution sign with the side of a folder. The sign shifted, barely, tilting a fraction off-center again. The janitor paused, not immediately, but after finishing the stroke he was on, then reached back without looking and nudged it into place with the side of his shoe. Victoria's gaze lingered there a second longer than before. It was a small correction. Unnecessary, given everything else happening. Yet he did it with the same attention as if the hallway were empty. "We are sweeping the lower levels now," A voice came through a nearby radio, louder this time, followed by the static crackle of confirmation. The janitor did not react. He moved the bucket forward, wheels clicking softly, then stopped near the vending machine again. His hand hovered over the lower panel where the faint smudge had been, not touching it, just close enough to cast a shadow over the mark. He tilted his head a few degrees, as if checking the angle of something unseen, then withdrew his hand and resumed. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, more in recalibration. The earlier assumption held, but not as firmly. Around her, movement continued, but the rhythm had shifted. People still searched, still spoke, yet their voices seemed to pass around the man rather than through him, leaving a pocket of quieter air that lasted a second longer than it should have before filling back in. Victoria shifted a few steps to the side, closer to the glass wall that overlooked the lobby below, though her attention did not follow the view. From that angle, the hallway stretched longer, the reflections of overhead lights forming a repeating pattern across the marble that made small disruptions easier to notice. The janitor moved within that pattern without breaking it. His pace remained even, not slow enough to draw attention, not fast enough to suggest urgency. He guided the mop in straight lines, each pass slightly overlapping the last, but he paused again at the same section near the vending machine, not where the traffic was heaviest, but where the floor met the wall. At a narrow angle, he adjusted his grip, sliding one hand an inch higher on the handle, then lowered the mop head carefully, almost as if he were avoiding something rather than cleaning around it. A pair of executives passed behind Victoria, their conversation hushed but sharp, numbers and deadlines folding into each other. One of them glanced toward the janitor briefly, then away, the look lasting no more than a second. It was the kind of glance people gave to confirm presence, not to observe. Victoria noticed the difference in herself. Her gaze did not move on. The janitor reached for the bucket again, but instead of pulling it forward immediately, he nudged it sideways with the toe of his shoe, aligning it parallel to the wall. The wheels clicked twice, then settled. He crouched slightly, not fully bending, just enough to bring his line of sight closer to the floor. From where Victoria stood, she could not see exactly what he was looking at, only that his attention held there longer than the task required. The radios flared again in the background, a voice reporting that the stairwells had been checked, another confirming the parking levels. The sound carried down the corridor, echoing off the glass, then softened as doors closed somewhere out of sight. The janitor did not reach for a radio. He did not turn toward the voices. He lifted the mop, let the excess water drip for a second, then placed it down again with a slight angle, as if adjusting for a difference in texture beneath the surface. A maintenance cart rattled past from the opposite end, pushed by another staff member who moved quickly, eyes forward, focused on a checklist clipped to the side. The cart clipped the edge of the small chair near the vending machine, shifting it a few inches out of alignment again. This time, the janitor did not correct it immediately. He finished the section he was working on first, then stepped over, placed 2 fingers on the backrest, and rotated the chair back into position with a small, precise movement. He stepped back half a pace, not to admire it, but to check its placement in relation to the wall and the machine, then returned to the mop. Victoria exhaled. Slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath. The sequence repeated itself in variations. The janitor moved, paused, adjusted something minor, then continued. None of it connected in an obvious way, yet the pattern refused to dissolve into randomness. At one point, he stopped near a column where the light shifted slightly due to a flicker in the overhead panel. He tilted his head, watching the way the reflection changed on the floor, then took a step to the side, testing the angle, before resuming his path along a line that avoided the brightest patch. It was not avoidance in the usual sense. It felt more like he was mapping something that others were not seeing. A young assistant hurried past him, nearly slipping on the edge of a damp section, catching herself with a quick step. The janitor glanced up then, just briefly, his eyes tracking her movement until she steadied, then lowered his gaze again without comment. He did not apologize. He did not warn. He simply adjusted the direction of his next pass, pulling the moisture back toward the center where the floor dried faster under the lights. Victoria's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction, her head tilting slightly, as if recalibrating distance. The earlier assumption lingered, but it no longer sat cleanly in place. There was no urgency in him, no visible concern, yet nothing about his behavior suggested distraction or ignorance. He was attentive, but not to the same things. The hallway continued to move around him, people crossing, voices rising and falling, radios marking time in clipped bursts. Still, there remained that small pocket where his movements seemed to operate on a different rhythm, one that did not interfere with the search but did not join it either. Victoria let her gaze follow him as he pushed the bucket a few inches forward again, the wheels rolling over the seam with a soft click, then stopping exactly where the next line of light began. Victoria did not return to the elevators this time. Instead, she stepped closer to the vending machine area, not directly approaching, but narrowing the distance enough that the small adjustments became easier to read. Her pace slowed without announcement, her heel touching down with less force, as if the sound might interfere with something she had not yet defined. The janitor had already moved a few feet down the corridor, but not far. He worked along the same stretch, looping back in a way that did not repeat exactly, yet never fully left the area. The pattern was subtle, not circling, not wandering, but returning. He guided the mop forward, then paused near the base of the wall again, this time shifting his weight onto his back foot before lowering the handle slightly. The motion was controlled, almost measured against the line where the wall met the floor. Victoria stopped beside a column, one hand resting lightly against the cool surface, her fingers flattening against the stone without pressing. From this angle, she could see the faint marks along the lower wall more clearly. Not dirt, something softer. Smudged color, low enough that it would not catch most people's attention unless they were already looking down. The janitor did not reach for it directly. Instead, he angled the mop away from it, pulling water across the adjacent tile, but leaving a narrow gap untouched. He moved past it, then after 2 more strokes, returned just enough to adjust the edge of the cleaned area so that the moisture stopped short of the mark. It was deliberate, not avoidance in haste, but in placement. A security supervisor crossed behind Victoria, speaking into a radio in a lower tone now, the urgency compressed into shorter phrases. "Check the conference wing again," he said, then paused, listening. His gaze flicked briefly toward the janitor, then back to the corridor ahead, already moving on. The janitor did not acknowledge him. He set the mop upright for a moment, reached down, and straightened the caution sign again, this time rotating it a few degrees so it faced slightly toward the flow of foot traffic rather than directly down the hall. He stepped back half a pace, not to assess it, but to align his next movement with the space it created. Victoria's eyes followed the adjustment, then returned to the floor. The small chair remained where he had placed it earlier, angled toward the hallway. A young employee passed, hesitated as if deciding whether to sit, then continued walking. The moment was brief, but it lingered longer in Victoria's awareness than it should have. The janitor resumed, drawing the mop in a line that curved slightly around the chair's legs without touching them. His movements were consistent, but not mechanical. Each pass seemed to respond to something specific, something local, rather than following a fixed route. A flicker in the overhead light shifted again, casting a thin band of shadow across the floor. He adjusted his path once more, stepping just outside the darker strip, then pulling the moisture back into the brighter area where it would evaporate faster. The choice was practical, but the timing of it aligned with the same section he had returned to twice already. Victoria's posture changed almost imperceptibly. She leaned forward a fraction, her head tilting slightly to refine her line of sight. The initial judgment no longer sat cleanly. It had not been replaced, but it had begun to loosen, its edges no longer sharp. The janitor reached for the bucket, rolling it forward a few inches, then stopping it with a gentle tap of his foot. The wheels settled into the seam between tiles, holding the position without drift. He glanced down briefly, not at the floor, but at the space just beyond the bucket, as if checking a boundary rather than a surface. Then he lowered the mop again and continued, the rhythm unchanged, the pattern repeating with small variations that no longer felt incidental. Around them, the hallway continued to function. Voices moved, radios clicked, footsteps crossed and receded. But the attention had begun to gather, not openly, not in a way that interrupted anything, but in small, quiet extensions of gaze, in pauses that lasted a beat longer than necessary. Victoria remained where she was, no longer passing through, no longer simply observing. She was waiting, though for what, she had not yet decided. Victoria did not move from the column, but her stillness had changed. It was no longer passive. Her gaze tracked the janitor with intent now, following not just where he went, but when he chose to stop, when he chose to continue. The pattern had repeated enough times to feel deliberate, yet it still resisted a clear explanation. She shifted her weight slightly onto her other foot, adjusting her angle by a few inches so that the lower portion of the wall remained in view without obstruction. A security guard approached from the far end of the hallway, slower than before, scanning the floor rather than the room. "We are checking everything at ground level again," he said to no one in particular, his voice quieter, as if the volume itself might help reveal something missed. He passed within a few feet of the janitor, then paused, noticing the same faint smudges along the base of the wall. He crouched briefly, brushing his fingers across one of the marks, then straightened with a small shake of his head. "Probably nothing," he muttered, already stepping away. The janitor did not acknowledge him. He had stopped just short of where the guard had crouched, his mop angled slightly away, leaving a narrow strip untouched. For a moment, he did nothing. His hand rested on the handle, fingers loose, his posture balanced but relaxed. The hallway seemed to hold its breath in a way that was not obvious until it lingered a second too long. A few conversations softened, not stopping, just lowering enough that the space around him felt clearer. Victoria noticed it then, the way attention gathered without announcement. Not everyone was looking, but enough were. Glances stretched a fraction longer. Movement slowed just enough to register. The janitor shifted his grip, sliding his hand down the handle by an inch, then nudged the bucket forward with the side of his shoe. The wheels rolled a short distance and settled again, the soft click echoing faintly against the glass. He stepped past the spot the guard had examined, not directly over it, but just to the side, and lowered the mop in a line that curved around the untouched strip. The motion was smooth, unhurried, consistent with everything he had done so far. Yet the placement was exact. He pulled the moisture inward, away from the base of the wall, leaving the lower edge dry. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, not in doubt, but in focus. She waited. The expectation had formed without her deciding it. If he was simply working, he would continue. If he was unaware, he would have already moved on. But he did neither. He finished the pass he had started, then paused again, this time longer. His head tilted slightly, not toward the floor, but toward the wall itself, as if listening to something beneath the surface rather than looking at it. A young analyst, passing behind Victoria, slowed almost unconsciously, his steps shortening as he glanced toward the same section of wall. He did not stop, but his head turned a fraction longer than necessary before he continued on. The janitor stepped back half a pace, lifting the mop upright. For a brief moment, he stood still, not frozen, but settled, as if allowing the space to reveal something on its own. The radios crackled again, but the sound seemed distant now, less intrusive. Someone reported that the upper offices were clear. Another voice confirmed the lobby had been rechecked. The words passed through the hallway without landing. The janitor reached down, not with the mop, but with his free hand. He did not touch the wall. His fingers hovered just above the surface, tracing an invisible line a few inches from the floor, following the faint smudges as they extended toward the corner where the hallway met the stairwell door. He withdrew his hand before making contact, then adjusted the position of the caution sign again, turning it slightly so that it no longer faced the main corridor but angled toward the side passage. The change was subtle, but it redirected the flow of people just enough that fewer footsteps crossed that section of floor. Victoria felt the shift before she fully registered it. The space opened, not physically, but in attention. Fewer interruptions. Fewer distractions. The janitor resumed, pushing the mop forward along the new path he had created, his movements unchanged, his pace steady. Yet now, the area he had been circling was clearer, more defined, as if he had quietly set the conditions for something to emerge without stating it. Victoria did not step in. She did not call out. She simply watched, her gaze fixed, waiting for the moment when the pattern would either break or reveal itself. And still, it did neither. The hallway did not return to its earlier rhythm. It settled into something quieter, more deliberate, as if the space itself had narrowed its focus. Victoria felt it in the way footsteps approached and then slowed without instruction, in the way voices dropped a register before crossing the section near the wall. No one said why. No one pointed. But the area the janitor had been working around now held attention in a way that could not be easily dismissed. He did not acknowledge any of it. He pushed the bucket forward another few inches, then stopped with a soft tap of his shoe, aligning it just before the corner where the hallway met the stairwell door. The metal surface of the door reflected a muted version of the corridor, distorted slightly by age and polish. He glanced at it briefly, not at his reflection, but at the lower edge where the frame met the floor. His hand moved to the side pocket of the card attached to the bucket. He reached in and pulled out a small roll of painter's tape, the kind used for temporary markings. The motion was unhurried, familiar. He tore off a strip, about 6 inches long, then crouched, not fully, just enough to bring his hand level with the baseboard. For a second, he held the tape between his fingers without placing it, his gaze following the faint smudges along the wall to the exact point where they curved toward the stairwell door. Then he pressed the tape down on the floor, not against the wall, but a few inches out, creating a short line that ran perpendicular to the baseboard. He smoothed it once with the side of his thumb, then added a second strip, forming a subtle boundary that extended just far enough to be noticed if someone were looking for it. Victoria's posture shifted. Not a step forward, not a command, just a slight straightening of her spine, her head tilting a fraction more to the right to keep the placement in view. The janitor stood, returned the roll of tape to his pocket, and reached again into the cart. This time he pulled out a small plastic bottle with a narrow spout, the kind used for controlled pouring. He unscrewed the cap, then knelt lower, bringing the tip close to the seam where the floor met the wall. He did not pour immediately. He moved the spout slowly along the edge, as if tracing the line without contact, then stopped at the corner where the smudges were most concentrated. A drop fell, then another. Clear liquid, spreading thinly along the seam, not flooding, not soaking, just enough to darken the edge of the grout. He moved the bottle a few inches at a time, placing small amounts with consistent spacing, following the same path the smudges had taken. The hallway grew quieter, not in sound, but in movement. A nearby assistant paused mid-step, then resumed more carefully, avoiding the taped line without being told. A security guard, approaching from the opposite direction, slowed and watched for a second longer than protocol required before stepping around the marked area. The janitor capped the bottle, set it back into the cart, and rose to his feet. He did not look up to see who was watching. He did not explain. He picked up the mop again and adjusted its angle slightly, then began to draw the moisture he had already spread inward, away from the wall, leaving the newly darkened seam undisturbed. Victoria's eyes followed the line he had marked, then the path of the liquid, then back to his hands. The sequence was simple. Tape, liquid, space. None of it aligned with the initial assumption she had made. It was not searching in the way the others were searching. It was not cleaning in the way cleaning was usually done. It was something else, something precise, something patient. She did not step closer. She did not interrupt. But her gaze did not leave him now. Around them, the corridor adjusted. People gave the space a wider berth. Conversations thinned near the corner. The radios continued, but their presence felt more distant, as if the focus had shifted to a smaller, quieter point. The janitor continued his work, steady as before, his movements unchanged except for the path he now followed, one that curved gently away from the wall and back again, maintaining the boundary he had set without ever looking at it directly. And in that small, controlled space, something in the rhythm of the hallway had shifted, not dramatically, but enough that it could no longer be ignored. For a moment, nothing changed. The thin line of tape sat quietly against the floor, the dampened seam along the wall darkened just enough to catch light differently. The janitor continued his measured path, drawing the remaining moisture inward, his movement steady, almost background again. Then, near the corner where the hallway bent toward the stairwell door, a small shift occurred. It was not loud, not sudden, just a faint scrape, soft, uneven, like rubber brushing against painted metal. Victoria's head turned a fraction before anyone else reacted. The sound came again, slightly clearer this time, from the narrow gap beneath the stairwell door. The liquid the janitor had placed along the seam had crept just enough to reveal a thin disturbance where it met the threshold. A faint line, interrupted, smudged differently than before, ran toward the base of the door. A security guard closest to the corner slowed mid-step, his radio lowering slightly from his mouth. He looked down, then toward the door, then back to the floor. "Did you hear that?" he asked, not loudly, just enough for the question to hang in the air. The hallway did not erupt. It tightened. Movement shifted inward. A few people stepped closer, but not too close, their pace controlled, their eyes drawn to the same point. The janitor did not look up. He guided the mop along the edge of the taped boundary, careful not to disturb the line he had set, then lifted it, letting the excess water drip back into the bucket with a soft, rhythmic tap. The sound under the door came once more, a faint shuffle this time, followed by a pause. Victoria took a step forward. Not quickly, not decisively, but enough to change her position from observer to participant. Her heels landed softer now, the sound absorbed by the attention already focused on the corner. She stopped just outside the taped line. Her gaze moved from the damp seam to the door handle, then back to the floor, tracking the path the liquid had outlined. It was no longer abstract. The smudges, the placement, the avoidance, it aligned. The janitor had not been circling without reason. He had been following something. The security guard reached for the handle, then hesitated, his hand hovering an inch away as if waiting for confirmation that had not yet been spoken. The janitor shifted his bucket slightly to the side, clearing the space without stepping into it, then resumed his grip on the mop. He did not signal. He did not instruct. He simply made room. The guard glanced once toward Victoria. She did not nod, did not speak, but her stillness held longer than before, her posture no longer dismissive. That was enough. The guard turned the handle slowly and pulled the door open a few inches. The hinge gave a low creak. Air moved. Cooler, quieter. The space beyond revealed the narrow landing between floors, dimmer than the hallway, lit by a single recessed fixture. And there, just beyond the threshold, partially tucked against the inner wall, a small figure shifted. A girl, knees drawn in, one hand clutching a notebook, the other pressed lightly against the concrete. She blinked at the light, then at the people in the doorway, her expression not panicked, not startled, just guarded, as if she had been waiting for the noise outside to settle before moving. No one rushed in. The guard stepped back half a pace instead of forward, his posture adjusting instinctively. The hallway held its breath again, but this time it was different. Not uncertainty. Recognition. Victoria's shoulders lowered a fraction, the tension in her stance easing without fully disappearing. Her eyes moved once more, briefly, toward the janitor. He was already drawing the mop away from the corner, pulling the remaining moisture back toward the center of the floor, maintaining the boundary he had created. He did not look at the girl. He did not look at the guard. His rhythm did not change. The tape remained in place, the darkened seams still visible, marking the path that had led to the door. Around them, the space adjusted. Voices returned, but softer. Movements resumed, but more deliberate. The focus had shifted from searching to presence. Victoria remained where she was for a second longer, then stepped slightly to the side, giving the doorway a clearer line without crossing into it. Her gaze did not carry the same quick certainty it had before. It lingered, recalibrated, then moved on, not away, but differently. And in that quiet, controlled transition, the hallway no longer felt like a place trying to prove something had been lost. It felt like a place that had just understood where to look. The door remained partially open, the narrow landing beyond no longer hidden, but not fully entered either. The girl shifted her weight, one sneaker scraping lightly against the concrete, the sound small but clear in the now quieter corridor. The security guard lowered himself slightly, not crouching all the way, just enough to reduce the height difference, his voice softer as he spoke a few words that did not carry far. The tension that had gathered moments before did not disappear. It thinned, spreading out into something steadier. Victoria did not step closer to the doorway. Instead, she adjusted her position by a few inches, angling her body so she could see both the girl and the space along the wall without blocking either. Her hands remained at her sides, but her fingers relaxed, no longer held in the tight alignment they had been in earlier. Her gaze moved once to the janitor, then back to the door, then down to the taped line. The sequence repeated, slower this time, as if she were confirming something rather than searching for it. The janitor continued along the corridor, his mop tracing a path away from the corner now, drawing the remaining moisture toward the center where the light fell evenly. He did not look toward the doorway again. He reached the vending machine, paused just long enough to lift the mop and adjust the bucket's position with a slight push of his foot, aligning it parallel to the machine's base. The small chair remained in place, still angled toward the hallway. A passing employee glanced at it, then at the open door, then continued on without stopping. The movement of people began to normalize, but not entirely. Steps were more careful near the taped line. Conversations resumed in low tones, but they did not spill into the corner. A woman from the reception desk approached with a bottle of water, hesitated at the boundary, then handed it to the guard without crossing the tape. The guard took it and placed it just inside the doorway, within reach of the girl, then shifted back again, maintaining the same measured distance. Victoria's head tilted slightly as she watched that exchange, her eyes narrowing just enough to register the choice. She did not intervene. She did not redirect. She allowed the moment to unfold without inserting instruction. Her attention returned once more to the janitor. He had moved farther down the corridor now, but his pace had not changed. He reached another section of floor where the light reflected unevenly and adjusted his path accordingly, pulling the dampness into a clean line that caught the overhead glow. His actions no longer felt disconnected from the earlier sequence. They fit, not in a way that demanded recognition, but in a way that did not need to be questioned anymore. Victoria took a small step forward, stopping just short of the taped boundary. She looked down at it again, then at the faint dark line along the base of the wall that had guided the discovery. Her foot shifted slightly, as if considering crossing, then settled back into place. She chose not to. Instead, she lifted her gaze and watched the guard speak quietly to the girl again, his posture still lowered, his movements deliberate. The hallway adjusted around that choice. A few more people passed through, their attention brief, their pace steady. The radios continued, but their tone had changed, less urgent, more procedural. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed with a soft click that echoed once and faded. Victoria exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, and turned her head just enough to follow the janitor's movement as he guided the bucket another few feet along. He did not look back. He did not pause. He simply continued, the same rhythm, the same quiet precision. And in that steady motion, the space he had shaped remained intact, not because anyone had been told to preserve it, but because they had chosen to. The hallway gradually released its focus. One by one, people resumed their usual pace, their steps no longer measured around the taped line, though most still gave it a slight margin without thinking. The security guards straightened fully now, guiding the girl gently out of the stairwell landing, not rushing, not pulling, just stepping beside her as she moved at her own pace. The notebook remained tucked under her arm, her grip loosening slightly as she crossed the threshold into the brighter corridor. The door stayed open behind her, no longer a point of tension, just another passage. Victoria remained where she was for a moment longer, her gaze following the girl until she was clear of the corner. Then, without urgency, she stepped forward, not across the tape, but close enough to see the seam along the wall where the faint marks had once been unnoticed. She bent slightly at the waist, not fully crouching, her hand hovering just above the line where the janitor had placed the liquid earlier. The darker edge had already begun to fade as it dried, blending back into the pale grout. She straightened again, slower this time, her posture settling into something less rigid. When she turned, her eyes found the janitor down the corridor. He had moved on, several yards away now, guiding the bucket along a new section of floor, his movements unchanged, his attention fixed on the immediate surface in front of him. For a brief second, Victoria held her gaze there, not evaluating, not questioning, just observing. Then she looked away. A staff member approached her, tablet in hand, beginning to speak about protocols and reports. Victoria lifted her hand slightly, not to dismiss, but to pause the flow of information. She waited until the guard and the girl had fully passed behind them, until the movement in the hallway had evened out again. Only then did she nod once, a small acknowledgement, and continued walking in the opposite direction without adding instruction. As she passed the vending machine, She slowed just enough to reach out and adjust the small chair by its backrest, aligning it a few degrees more toward the hallway, almost exactly where it had been before. The motion was quiet, unannounced, and she did not look down as she did it. She continued on, her heels returning to their usual rhythm, steady and measured. Behind her, the janitor's bucket rolled softly over the tile seam, the wheels clicking once before settling. He paused near another patch of uneven light, adjusted his grip, and continued, the same pace, the same quiet precision, as if nothing in the hallway had required anything more from him than what he had already given. The taped line near the stairwell remained for a while, catching a few glances before fading into the background of the day. If this moment stayed with you, share what you noticed. Follow for more quiet stories like this. Thank you.